The Trial of Henry Kissinger by Christopher Hitchens. I picked this book up years ago. I was in Loveland, Colorado, and I was about to fly out, and I wanted something to read on the airplane, so stopped in the bookstore and picked up The Trial of Henry Kissinger. And I was kind of surprised because Christopher Hitchens, this was 2008. I think this was April of 2008. And at the time, Christopher Hitchens had become a rabid proponent of military action in the Middle East. Big pusher of the Second Gulf War. The whole weapons of mass destruction thing and all that. He was real big advocate of that. And of course, he's passed on now. And of course, as the learned listener will know, Christopher Hitchens was also a rabid atheist. So what really made me curious enough to pick this up and start reading it on the flight was Christopher Hitchens being a very pro-war proponent. I had not been as familiar with his anti-war stance on the trial of Henry Kissinger. And I believe this was later made into a PBS documentary or PBS miniseries called The Trials of Henry Kissinger, and that adding an S to it made it more about like the man's personal frailties or whatever. But the fascinating thing about this book, the whole point of the book is showing that Henry Kissinger is a war criminal at large for his actions in Vietnam, that for the policies he encouraged and signed off on, that he is literally a war criminal at large. And Christopher Hitchens' position, very well spoken in this, very well laid out in this book, is that this is essentially evidence against Henry Kissinger so that he could be tried as a war criminal. And he believed that he should be tried as a war criminal. And when you read this, you will believe that Henry Kissinger is a war criminal at large and should be put away for the remaining years. I think even death himself doesn't want to take Henry Kissinger away, because somehow this dude is just bordering on timeless, how he is somehow staggering around still in active writing history as we speak. So who knows what's up with that guy. But yeah, Henry Kissinger to me is just a picture of walking corruption. But this is a really, really well written book and very well written thesis on why Henry Kissinger should not be walking around in the general population and why he should be locked away for the war criminal that he is. Now back to Christopher Hitchens. The fascinating thing is when you read this book, it is almost impossible to reconcile the later positions that Christopher Hitchens took pro-Iraq war positions that he later took not long after writing this book, because I believe this was published in 2001, like early 2001. And I just want to confirm that. I think, first published in 2001. So he wrote this in 2001 and did a complete about face by 2003, or really by 2002. So probably about a year later, this dude was singing a totally different tune. Whether or not he changed his tune on Henry Kissinger is another matter entirely, but I find that very conspicuous because this is a very well-articulated case that he makes, and it's kind of like what I was talking about in a previous review with Martin Cannon and his case in the manuscript, The Controllers. It's kind of like when you fly up into space and see the curvature of the Earth, it's hard to go back from that and go, oh, well, the Earth is flat. It's like once you have taken in that evidence that shapes your worldview, that you see something for what it is, and it's impossible not to see it that way, it's hard to walk back from that. And that's essentially kind of what he's done here in a different way. Obviously, he's talking about Vietnam, but the exact same issues he's addressing about the Vietnam War, all the examples could be applied to the run-up to the war with Iraq. So this really makes you wonder what was happening in the shadows, what was happening with Christopher Hitchens that got him to do an about face on that. And I'll refrain from going into my thoughts about his atheism too much, except just to say this: that is one of the things that does make me always a little bit wary when someone professes a really strong militant atheist position, is because they're basically saying, I have no core substance, I have no central value system that's independent of my being that I check myself against. And as a result, I can be swayed by either financially, through ideologies, other ideologies that might seem more appealing at the time, or just to avoid ridicule. I might just totally change my views because I want to go with the flow. And it's almost like very powerful people stepped in and said, hey, Mr. Hitchens, would be great is if you just walked away from that position and took this position. And he was like, sounds good to me. And off he went. So really a conundrum there about Mr. Hitchens' take on that, because again, I highly rate, really good read. You will definitely not ever think of Henry Kissinger the same after this. And this has some really good non-conspiratorial, for lack of a better way to put it, but a lot of really good looks behind the scenes of how power works. And without getting into, well, hey, I think the Trilateral Commission was saying this or this. He's very matter of fact of, I can prove this guy was part of this group and this group was making this decision for this group. And so it's all very tactile, very real. There's no speculation in it. And again, back to his original point, this whole thing is literally evidence that could be used in a court of law to put Mr. Henry Kissinger away for whatever time he has remaining. So fascinating book, and like I said, even more fascinating in its bigger picture, its place in history, knowing that about a year later you have the author do an about face on that and just take a totally different view. So highly recommend it. If any of you have read this and have any opinions about Mr. Hitchens, I'd love to hear them. Not to rag on the atheist crowd too much, but sadly, my experience has been some of the people I've seen turn on me worse than anybody else is the people who have literally no set of actual spiritual values and seem proud of it. So there you go. The Trial of Henry Kissinger by Christopher Hitchens, published in 2001.